Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Nathan? Yeah, but I don't think does this help? Yeah. Okay. Gary told me I didn't need the mic, so as long as you can hear me, I guess that's the main thing, right? Oh, we're glad to have you all here today. And we also have Mike and Martha with us visiting from Mount, is it Mike? I got that right. I'm not going to try the last name. Mike and Martha are visiting with us from Mount Airy, Maryland. They go to a PCA church down there, and they just picked us out of nowhere this morning, decided to come here, but they're on the list to go to Garden Spot. So, pardon? Oh, it's predestined. Oh, they were here because they were predestined to be here. At any rate, we're glad to have you all here today. Some of you probably had no idea what's going on here in Sunday school for the next few weeks, but I'll explain it to you. 6 months ago, I was asked to do a series on Handel's Messiah as a sort of a preparation for the Christmas season, which is a time that most often the Messiah is performed. And I was thinking about how I want to do this to try to give some background to it and to try to make it something that could be at least a little enjoyable. So I want to explain to you today sort of what these next 7 lessons are going to be. Today, we're going to be spending time strictly on a biography of George Frederick Handel. Yeah, for those of you that don't know about him, we'll give you some information about him. And so we'll be spending time on that. Sort of interesting, you know, when you think about the fact that George Frederick Handel was born in 1685, that's many years ago, right? But it's also interesting, he was born in Germany, but there was another wonderful composer that was born the same year, Johann Sebastian Bach. Hard to believe that those two were both born in the same year in Germany. And then in Italy, there was also another man born that year by the name of Scarlatti, who was a very good composer as well. And actually, Scarlatti and Handel learned to know each other pretty well when Handel went to Italy. But Bach and Handel hardly ever interfaced with each other, even though they were both in Germany. And it was interesting because Johann Sebastian Bach actually died 9 years before Handel did. So Handel lived 9 years longer. So at any rate, that's giving you a little bit of background here. And before we get started, I think everyone's pretty much in place now. Let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the people that you have called through the years to enrich our lives. And the fact that we have been able to be so enriched by George Frederick Handel's life, we just thank you for the music that that you inspired him to write, and other composers as well. And we thank you for the privilege we have today of taking a look at this and seeing how your providence worked in his life and how it also works in ours. And we just thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. You're having trouble hearing me? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought we had that resolved. Let me turn up the volume. Well, which one of these things is going to turn up this volume? Let me try something here a minute. I can speak louder if you want, but I don't want to yell. Does that help at all? Okay, let's try that. How's that? Okay. All right. Now, how do I get back to where I was, right? Oops. There we are. For some reason, and you'll see, for those of you that need closed captioning, you're going to see that here today. Nathan doesn't know why. He said it started doing it the other night for some reason, and he can't figure out how to turn it off. So if you want to read my words, if you can't hear me, you can read it up here. Okay, hopefully. Okay, now as we go along through these lessons, I mentioned to you what we're going to do. We're going to do a biography today. Next week, we're going to look at the history of Messiah itself, how it came into being, and sort of the contents of the Messiah. Most of us know the Hallelujah chorus. I find there are a lot of people that don't know anything beyond that. And so you'll find out more. Then when we get into November the 20th, you'll see I have broken down part 1 and into 2 sections. What we're going to actually do is I'm going to actually give you Messiah scores. I have the music. And when you come into the class, just pick up a copy. Now, these are not yours. These belong to another organization. Okay. So at the end of the day, after you use it to follow along or whatever you're doing with it, make sure it goes back on the same pile where you got it. All right. Is that fair? I thought it would really be helpful for you to actually see the music as we listen to it. And what we're going to do is the first part of Messiah, of course, is the prophecy and about Christ's birth. And we're going to break that into 2 parts. And you're going to hear everything that he wrote in those 2 lessons, in those first 2. And December 4th and 11th, we're going to move into the suffering section, Christ's death and so forth. And then you can follow along. You'll hear all the solos. You'll hear, we're using a recording of the Robert Shaw Chorale, which is one of my favorites. And he doesn't take it as fast as some of the one recordings today take it so fast that it just happens, gets done too fast. So December 18th, we'll look at the 3rd part of the Messiah. But we'll go over this a little bit more next week when you have your copies. I'll explain some things from inside it. Okay, so today we're going to begin with a biography of George Frederick Handel. You'll see his name, Frederick, spelled different ways. Frederick is the way he changed his name to Frederick after he went to London. He actually ended up living in London, and he spelled his name Frederick, and he changed it because originally I think it was Frederick. Sure, if you want to get the lights, that's fine. Wake me up at the end. Is that better? Okay. All right. So George Frederick Handel was born February the 23rd, 1685. And his parents were George and Dorothea Handel, and they were in Germany. Whoops. This is what I don't like about teaching this way, but use it. All right, let's try this again. I'm not sure why that happened. Is it still giving my word? It is. Okay. He was born in Halle, Saxony, Germany. Halle is where he was born. Why are you watching it? Now, I don't know how to do that.
Recording, you have to be.
I'm used to teaching with a chalkboard, and it's much better.
Can I get out of that?
Yeah.
Oh, here it is.
Right here.
Yeah,
But why did it stop screen sharing?
I don't know why it's, well, that's what happened, whatever you hit.
I don't know if you hit.
Where's my mouse? Camera's off.
There we go. There we go.
Screen share. Share it, sound and optimize. And you want to do screen 2. and you want to share that. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, folks.
Mhm. Is that where you wanted to go?
That's where no, it's not where I wanted to go. I want to go up here. This one.
That one?
That's where I was, yes.
Okay.
Is it sharing now?
Yes.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so today we're going to take a look at his early life, and then we're going to look at the operas that he composed. Not all, we're not going to look at operas, we're just going to talk about it, where he was. Then we're going to talk about how the oratorios came into existence, which is what the Messiah is. It's an oratorio, it's not an opera. And then we're going to talk about his health issues. It's amazing that both he and Bach had some of the same health issues. So it's just amazing. And then his death and legacy. Okay. All right. So let's move forward here. We'll start with, now see if this is going to. All right. Okay. It's not giving me, it's not giving us. Apparently it's sharing. There, oops. There we go. It's correct here. I came in here and spent an hour here yesterday or a couple of days ago making sure this worked.
I think we want to go from the current slide. But why doesn't it?
I'm not sure why it's not changing it.
Well, the thing is, it's like it's not.
What if we click on the PowerPoint? That's crazy.
It's not going into the program.
Let me just start this over. I can do that.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
Okay, hang on, folks.
Your Windows screen instead of clicking.
Here. Here, let me get down here again. Let me start over again.
That's what you want to do.
Okay.
Now go.
Am I okay there now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just go to slideshow.
And from beginning.
Okay. Now that's the way it's supposed to be.
Now two.
Oh, we don't have screen sharing again.
I don't understand that. What did it? No.
Now this is working. You can use the arrow or this, I think. Oh, you have to click in here.
Welcome to our church. We're high tech here.
Yep, this is it. It's working now. You can use your up and down or this.
The mouse. Okay. All right.
You got it.
Okay, that's where I want to be. All right. Now we're back to his early life. Okay. His father was a barber surgeon, and his father did not want him to get involved in music. His father wanted him to be a lawyer because he didn't see any future in music, just like it is today. It's hard to make a living in music. Right? I'm kidding, but it's true. It really was true. They did not there was no future for him. So he decided he wanted his son to become a lawyer. So Handel did not want to become a lawyer. He just loved music. So when he was very young, his mother supported him. And the story goes that they actually took a clavichord up to the, up in the attic where his father would not hear him at night. And he would go up there and practice at night. And he would take strips of cloth and put it through the strings to keep them from playing. But he was still able to practice, even though he couldn't necessarily hear what he was doing. But so his mother was very supportive. As a matter of fact, he was very attached to his mother until the time he died, as long as she lived. So what ends up happening is that while he was there in Germany, he had an opportunity as a young boy. He was less than 10 years old, to actually visit a cathedral, and the Duke heard him play. The Duke of the area heard him play, and they decided that he needed to be trained. And so he actually met a composer and organist by the name of Zachow. And Zachow taught him everything he could know until he got to the point where he said, "I can't teach you anymore. You know more than I do." And this child is still only less than 11, 12 years old. So he became the assistant organist there at that church. And then he also learned to play the violin and the oboe during that time. So he loved those instruments. Well, shortly after this, he actually, while he moved to Hamburg from Halle. Well, maybe I should back up and say that after his father died, while they lived in Halle, and when his father died, he had this desire to please his dad. So he decided to go and enroll in law school at Halle. So he attended the University of Halle for about a year, and it didn't last very long because he just couldn't deal with his being away from music, which is what he wanted to do. So he actually joined the opera orchestra in Hamburg. And while he was there, he played the violin, and he would hear, while they were doing these operas, he would hear these choruses, and he was enthralled by the sound of the majesty of choral music. And also while he was there was a lot of jealousy going on between some of the other players and him, because they realized how talented he was, and they didn't want their positions threatened. This sounds sort of like human nature, doesn't it? So there was a lot of concern there. So while he was there, and he decided also to, I said he left the University of Halle, and then when he was 18 years old is when he actually went to Hamburg. He supplemented his income there by teaching private music in his free time, private lessons, and passed on what he had learned from Zachow. Through working as a violinist, it still was his ability to play the harpsichord and to play the organ that really earned him attention and landed him more opportunities to perform in operas. At that point, he began to compose in operas. And he composed an Italian opera while he was in Germany. And then he decided he was going to move to Italy, where all the Italian operas were going on. There's lots to happen. So he was like 21 years old, 20, 22, 24, and he wrote a lot of operas when he got to Italy. And then while he was there, he met someone who was very influential in his life and told him about the musical scene in London. So he decided to move back to London. This is after 3 years in Italy. He moved back to London. And then he was there for like 40 years or more, quite a while. He stayed in London, and he composed music there. And he actually learned the English language. Remember, he grew up German, learned the English language. So he changed his name to Frederick also. And during this time that he got all excited about being able to put on these operas and so forth. But what ended up happening was, after a while, people got tired of the operas. There were just so many of them. And the operas were about any kind of a theme, and people just got sick of it. And they got sick of it and they didn't attend them anymore. Plus he had, as I mentioned before, there was a lot of jealousy. He had two sopranos that I guess were both divas, and they decided that they were going to argue, and they fought with each other, and he got tired of that too, and of dealing with personalities and so forth in London. Ends up, he moves back to, or he stays in London, but he decides he's going to try something different. And what he did is he started creating this thing called an oratorio. Let me move here next. See what happens when I change the slide. Did it work? Yeah. It did. In 1705, he did his first opera in Germany. And then from 1706 to 1709, he was composing operas in Italy. And then when he started this new genre called oratorios. Can anyone here tell me what the difference is between an oratorio and an opera? No, they're both sung. Right. The oratorio had no sets, no acting. It was just, everything was done by the music itself. So he started creating oratorios, and he based them pretty much the same as the oratorio or the operas of that day. He actually even took some operas, took away all the drama, and made them into oratorios. So I know this is probably boring you to tears, but that's okay. Maybe something will stick. Okay, so he was creating oratorios, and oratorios were made up of solos and choruses, and there was never anything just spoken, but there were things called recitatives, which the recitatives were like dramatic music using words, but not being floral, and really it was just like speaking with music. Okay. When he was 25 years old is when he left Venice and went back to England. So he was there for a long time. Then the music that he wrote came to the attention of nobility, and nobility then, he started writing music for the nobility, and they all kinds of events that they would have. I'll show you something a little bit later about water music and fireworks and things like that, where he wrote music specifically for those events, but primarily the oratorios. Now I ask this question: when you think of an oratorio, does it always refer to a biblical character or story? What is your impression of that when you think? They're not. Or operas are based on mythology and all kinds of other stories, but the oratorios are based primarily on biblical stories, but not all. Not all of them were biblical stories. But he wrote an opera called Jephthah. He wrote one called Samson. He wrote one called Israel in Egypt, in addition to Messiah. Actually, Israel in Egypt was written before Messiah. Messiah was written toward the end of his life, actually. And but that's the one that he is well known for, and primarily today. You know, it's amazing how things happen because they're driven by financial situations. The operas required so much money to put them together because of all the expensive costumes and sets and things like that, and it became a financial burden to produce operas. So that was one of the things that was used to change to the oratorios, or the reason they went, because of the financial implications. as he started doing operas, these became the craze in London. Everyone wanted to. They were not performed primarily in churches. Today we do, especially Messiah is done in churches, and some of the others are done. And he was not the only one then to create oratorios. There are people that followed him, like Haydn. Haydn created an oratorio called Creation, and Mendelssohn created one called Elijah. So he was not the only composer, but he was primarily the first one to really take the English language and use it in his as the text. The text for the Messiah basically, well, maybe I should say this for next week, but primarily came from the King James version of the Bible, which was the Bible they were using in those days. And so the text would come from that. But just to give you an idea of how prolific he was, in 1735, okay, he would have been 50 years old. During Lent time, he produced 14 concerts made up primarily of oratorios, all in that one season, 14 of them. And the lieutenant, the Lord Lieutenant in Dublin, commissioned him to write a new oratorio based on a biblical libretto, which was put together by Charles Jennens, Jennens. And as a result of that came the Messiah. He wrote that when he was 57 years old. He died at my age, 74. So this was, I say it was toward the end of his life, but I guess it wasn't in many ways. Charles Jennens, who gave him the libretto for Messiah, had a deep knowledge of the Bible, and basically all the text for the Messiah comes from scriptures. Musicologist Watkins Shaw described it as, quote, a meditation of our Lord as Messiah in Christian thought and belief. Some attribute Messiah's emphasis on the Old Testament and choice of the Old Testament title Messiah to Jennens' theological beliefs. Jennens was not terribly happy with what Handel did with it. One of the things that an opera always had at the beginning of it was an overture or a musical introduction. And Jennens, and so when Handel started doing, creating oratorios, he did the same thing. He put this musical introduction in it, and Jennens did not like that. And he actually complained to Handel about it, but Handel wouldn't give it up. He wanted to retain that, and he was very obstinate about it, and he did. And so Jennens says, there are passages far unworthy of Handel, but much more unworthy of the Messiah. So he was very fussy about that. Now let's move to our next slide here. Health issues. Over the course of his musical career, Handel was exhausted by stress, not just of writing music, but people he had to deal with, people where there was a lot of pettiness and so forth. And he endured a number of potentially debilitating problems with his health. He's also believed to have suffered from anxiety and depression. Yet somehow, he was able to laugh in the face of adversity and remain virtually undeterred in his determination to keep making music. When he was 52 years old, he suffered a stroke that impaired the movement of his right hand. His fans worried that he would never compose again, but after 6 weeks of recuperation, he was fully recovered. He went back to London and not only returned to composing, but made a comeback at playing the organ as well, in spite of having lost use of his hands. 6 years later, at 58, he suffered a second stroke. This time, he stunned audiences once again with a speedy recovery, followed by a prolific stream of music that he wrote. During the time when he was unable to write, he had an assistant who he would dictate to that person what he wanted, and they would write it down for him. When you see some of the writings, you'll see one of those here in a bit. You wonder how on earth people even read it and were able. It's like trying to read Stu Sachs, and when he writes music, it's all tiny. He knows what it is, but sometimes it's hard to read because the composer's thinking so fast and they write things down. And back in those days, they didn't have nearly the things that we do today to use. But it's interesting. It was also interesting that one of the oratorios he wrote was called Samson. It premiered when he was 58 years old. That was the year that he had his second stroke. And he had some blindness. Apparently, they had tried to do some cataract work or something, and he messed up his eyes. The same thing happened to Bach. He messed up his eyes, and he reflected on the Samson's blindness because of his own firsthand experience with the progressive degeneration of his sight. And one of the pieces in that oratorio has these words: total eclipse, no sun, no moon, all dark amidst the blaze of noon. O glorious light, no cheering ray to glad my eyes with welcome day. That's one of the texts from Samson. And of course, you remember Samson was also blinded in the biblical story. By 1750, when he was 65 years old, he had completely lost his sight in his left eye. He continued on, though, and he composed another opera or another oratorio called Jephthah. And in that one also, there's a reference to obscured vision. When he was 67 years old, now remember 65, he lost his eyesight in his left eye. 67, 2 years later, he lost sight in his other eye and was rendered completely blind. As always before, Handel's passionate pursuit of music propelled him forward. He kept on performing and composing, relying on his sharp memory to compensate when necessary, and he remained actively involved in productions of his works until his dying day. On April the 14th, 1759, Handel died in his bed. He rented a house at 25 Brook Street in part of London. He was 74 years old. As he was dying, he prayed and remarked to the people around him that he would like to die on the same day that Jesus did. He wanted to die on Good Friday. Well, he died Good Saturday. He died the next day. He didn't die on the day that Jesus did. But he was known for being a generous man, even in death. He never married or fathered children, and he divided his assets among his servants and several charities, including the Foundling Hospital. Foundling Hospital became a beneficiary of many concerts of the Messiah, which he worked. He even donated money to pay for his own funeral so that none of his loved ones would bear the financial burden. He was buried in Westminster Abbey a week after he died. And following his death, biographical documents began to circulate, and he soon took on legendary status posthumously. During his lifetime, Handel composed nearly 30 oratorios and close to 50 operas. At least 30 of those operas were written for the Royal Academy of Music, London's very first Italian opera company, of which Handel had been the director. He was also a prolific writer of orchestral pieces and many other musical things. He is said to have made significant contributions to all of the musical genres of his generation. And of course, his most renowned work, which we're going to be looking at specifically starting next week, is Messiah. In 1784, 25 years after Handel's death, 3 commemorative concerts were held in his honor at the Parthenon and Westminster Abbey. And in 2001, which isn't that long ago, Handel's home on the Brook Street where he died became the site of the Handel House Museum. established in memory of his legendary life and works. But now you know more about Handel than you probably did before. And I think it gives us a little bit of a background, seeing how when we look at our own lives, you know, sometimes they can seem very mundane as we go from day to day. And yet we need to realize that God is, in his providence, is using each of, in developing us, just like he did Handel, for the task that he had called him to do. There aren't a lot of us that are going to sit and write music all our lives. But you know what? It's just amazing how God uses us just like he used Handel. And you think of the generations in the future that we never know the impact. I'm sure Handel never had an idea of what he would do or what his music and Messiah would mean to so many people, not just in London, but around the world. As some of you know, I've had the privilege of directing the Messiah over close to 60 times. And as I think back on it, you know, someone once said that, why do you keep doing this over and over again? And you know, as generations change from generation to generation, you realize that there are some people, when we do that, that are hearing it for the first time, and some that are hearing it for the last.